There is something deeply moving about realizing that some of the first people to truly see Black women in beauty were Black women themselves. When the world ignored our skin, our features, our needs, women like Madam C.J. Walker, Annie Malone and Poro College, Marjorie Joyner, Eunice Johnson, Fashion Fair, and Black Opal stepped in and said, "We will create for ourselves. We will name ourselves. We will fund ourselves." What they built was bigger than beauty. It was care. It was community. It was economic hope. And every time we talk about Black-owned beauty today, we are speaking from these legacies and these women who fought to leave it behind. What if I told you the Black beauty industry was never just about lipstick, powder, or shade ranges? What if the real story is that Black women were building wealth, power, and self-definition through beauty long before the mainstream ever caught up? There is a story hiding in plain sight every time we pick up a lipstick, press powder into the skin, swipe on rouge, or look into a mirror and ask ourselves one quiet but loaded question. Who told us what beauty was supposed to look like in the first place? For Black women especially, cosmetics were never just about color, glamour, or vanity. They were never just about a red lip or a compact or a jar of cold cream sitting elegantly on a vanity tray. Beneath the surface, there was something much deeper unfolding. There was resistance, there was intention, there was invention, there was strategy, there was survival, and there was ownership. When we talk about the history of Black cosmetics, what we're really talking about is a history of refusal, a refusal to disappear, a refusal to wait for permission, a refusal to be locked out of industries that profited from beauty while rejecting Black faces, Black skin tones, Black features, and Black entrepreneurship. Long before diversity became a marketing slogan, long before shade ranges became a public relations talking point, Black women were already doing the work. They were formulating, mixing, bottling, branding, selling, and entire beauty economics from the ground up. In kitchens, in back rooms, in home labs, in beauty schools, in communities where mainstream retail doors were not simply closed, but bolted shut. That is what makes this history so radical. It was not just cosmetic, it was economic, it was political, it was cultural. It was a declaration that Black beauty would not be defined by exclusion. Too often, the beauty industry is framed as though it only became inclusive once major brands finally discovered women with deeper skin tones. But that version of the story is far too convenient and, frankly, far too dishonest. Black women did not suddenly appear in the beauty conversation. Black women actually created parallel systems because they had to. They built businesses because mainstream department stores, if you remember, and fashion houses and cosmetic counters did not see them as worthy of the investment, the visibility, or the dignity. What did Black pioneers do? Well, they made their own way. They became chemists without formal recognition, marketers without corporate backing, executives without institutional support. They also became manufacturers without access to the same supply chains. We all know that. And still, somehow, they built empires. This is the part of the story that should stop us in our tracks. The brilliance was there. The demand was there. The discipline, it was there. The consumer base was there. The only thing that was missing was access. And when the access was denied, Black cosmetic pioneers did not fold into defeat. They turned self-ownership into a weapon. There is something profoundly moving about the image of a kitchen stove alchemy, a woman standing over a mixture, testing oils and powders and pigments and waxes and creams, not because the world made room for her innovation, but because it did not. That image deserves more reverence than it gets. It was not amateur, it was visionary. It was the beginning of a beauty infrastructure born not into luxury towers or elite boardrooms, but inside Black ambition itself. Every formula represented experimentation. Every product represented risk. Every sale represented trust. And every returning customer represented proof that Black consumers had always known what the mainstream industry refused to admit. Black beauty is not a niche. It is not an afterthought. It is not a temporary trend. It is a market, a culture, a language, and it is a force. And yet, what makes this history even more powerful is that these pioneers were not only selling beauty products, they were selling possibility. A lipstick tube could fit in the palm of your hand, but what it represented was far larger. It represented autonomy. It represented access to income. It represented presentation on one's own terms. It represented the right to be seen without apology. It represented the right to choose self-definition over distortion. For Black women navigating in a world that constantly tried to diminish them, misname them, and render them invisible, cosmetics became one more place where identity could be reclaimed. That reclaiming matters because beauty has always been political, whether society wants to admit it or not. Politics may not always announce themselves loudly, but they are there in every advertisement that excludes, in every product line that ignores deeper skin, in every standard that quietly centers whiteness while pretending to be universal. So when Black cosmetic companies emerged and insisted on serving Black consumers directly, they were doing more than filling shelves. They were correcting a lie. They were challenging the assumption that beauty only became legitimate when validated by white-owned institutions. They were proving that Black communities did not need outside gatekeepers to determine value, sophistication, or desirability. And that is where self-ownership becomes such a critical part of this story. Ownership changes the entire equation. Ownership means the creator is not simply participating in the market, she is shaping it. Ownership means control over message, over image, formula, pricing, distribution, and legacy. Ownership means the power to hire, train, teach, and circulate wealth within the community. Ownership means that beauty is no longer just being consumed, it's being leveraged as a blueprint for mobility. This is why the history of Black cosmetics should never be reduced to a sentimental side note in a beauty culture. It sits at the intersection of labor, race, gender, entrepreneurship, and liberation. It shows us what happens when people who are excluded from the official table build one of their own. It reveals the extraordinary ingenuity that can emerge under pressure, but it also forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Black innovation has often been celebrated only after it becomes profitable or palatable to the mainstream. Now, the pioneers are overlooked, the formulas are imitated, the aesthetics are still borrowed, the language is recycled, the culture is mined, but the original builders are too often pushed into the margins of the very industries that helped create. That pattern should sound familiar because it keeps happening. Black beauty trends are adopted, renamed, softened for wider consumption, and then sold back to the public as fresh innovation. Now, meanwhile, the people who lived it, shaped it, and built businesses around it are expected to be grateful for belated recognition. Well, the real history tells a different story. It tells us that Black cosmetic pioneers were never waiting to be discovered. They were already masters of reinvention, already visionaries of branding, already experts in consumer loyalty, already architects of aesthetic power. And then there is another layer to this that deserves attention. Cosmetics in Black communities were often tied to ritual, to aspiration, professionalism, femininity, performance, and public identity. A beauty routine was not always just a routine. Sometimes it was armor. Sometimes it was softness in a hard world. Sometimes it was discipline. Sometimes it was joy. And sometimes it was survival dressed in elegance. To dismiss that as superficial is to miss the emotional and social weight beauty can carry, especially for women whose image has historically been attacked, caricatured, or controlled. So, when Black-owned cosmetic empires emerged, they were not simply selling products into a market gap. They were responding to an emotional and cultural hunger that mainstream beauty had long ignored. They understood that Black women did not just want cosmetics that technically worked. What they wanted was to feel recognized. They wanted products made with them in mind. They wanted shades that did not ask them to disappear. They wanted branding that did not treat them like a problem to solve. They wanted glamour without erasure. That desire for recognition helped transform beauty entrepreneurship into something much larger than commerce. It became community building. It became a transfer of knowledge. It became a mentorship. It became a symbol of what Black enterprise could look like when nurtured from within rather than filtered through outside approval. Entire ecosystems developed around these brands, sales, networks, salons, educators, manufacturers, loyal customers, and advocates. And in that ecosystem was a powerful message. We can build for ourselves, sell to ourselves, and define ourselves. The story does not end with one lipstick, one brand, or an era. It expands into a larger archive of Black brilliance that deserves to be seen in full.